It is the intention of Mount Sorrel Heritage Group to preserve the memories of Mount Sorrel villagers by recording their oral histories. Your recorded interview will then become a part of the Mount Sorrel online archive. Today, on the 18th of November, we are here to record the life and times of Roy Bennett. My name is Robin Davis and I'm helped by Linda Timon from the Heritage Group. Over to you, Roy.
Well, I have done a little bit of a memoir, say, for my family, so I thought I could just adapt that for this interview. So I'll begin there. On June the 1st, 1926, it was an unusual day at 8 Crown Lane, Mount Sorrel. It was Derby Day, it was cold and it was snowing. But for the family father, Gus, mother Violet and their 3 little daughters, Violet 6, Marjorie 4 and Joan 2 years of age, it was also rather a special one. Earlier that morning, the new family member they had been waiting to welcome had arrived. A brother for the 3 girls, which was me, who they later called Roy, and it was a happy time. The cottage, a 2 up and 2 down, with water pump in the yard, an outhouse with a copper and a lavvy or privy at the bottom of the small garden, lay in the shelter of one of Mount Sorrel Quarry's waste tips. The granite quarry was 200 yards away, and in 1926 times were hard for working class families. Work was hard to come by due to the recession or slump, and wages poor. So another mouth to feed and back to clothe was a constant worry to the parents, but they were both hard workers and could turn their hands to most things. Before the war, Dad, who was born in Loughborough, trained in Loughborough as a cobbler. So besides working at the quarry 5.5 days a week for a few shillings, he also repaired shoes and swept chimneys, whilst Mum added to that by scrubbing floors and taking in ironing, so that although it was always a struggle, no one, except Mum, went without. Dad's reward for his hard work was usually a pint of beer at the weekend and a packet of Park Drive. We were all very happy together until one day when I was about 2 years old, something happened which made things even harder for Mum and Dad. The family were sitting at the table eating dinner when Joan dropped her spoon and couldn't pick it up again. Dr. Strawn, the GP who had his surgery a short distance away, opposite St. Peter's Church, came over and later told us that there was a new disease called polio, brought to Europe during the Great War, probably from India, and several children in the village had it. It caused paralysis, and Joan lost the use of her right arm and left leg. It was a terrible thing to happen, and Dr. Strawn was very, very supportive. He used to phone to London regularly to obtain the latest information on treatments, etc. There was no NHS in those days, and I am sure he often did what he could without any payment. Later, Mum heard there was a Cripples Guild that had been set up in Leicester to help victims of polio. It was run by a charity, and Mum then used to take Joan by bus and carry her to the guild. They provided a caliper, an iron support for her leg, and a boot with a very thick cork sole and heel. And they also taught her to walk with them. It was very difficult for both of them, but I never remember either of them complaining. Joan's condition did not change, but all through her life she was determined to do everything the other girls did. There was a parade every June when local businesses decorated their vehicles and villagers dressed up as different characters, and, led by the village band, paraded from Hawcliffe Road to the Green, where prizes were given to the best turnout. It was one of the highlights of the year, and people came from all round to see it. A collection was taken and the proceeds went to the Leicester hospitals to pay for a bed in case one of the villages needed it. Joan always insisted on joining in, usually on one of the vehicles. The next big event was the fair, which came to the Green every year, later, usually in July. When traffic increased, it was transferred to the playing fields, and Joan insisted I take her on many of the rides as we could save the money up for, the dodgems, the big horses, etc. In later years, she married, had 3 daughters, and ran a sweet shop on the marketplace. Every Sunday we were all washed, polished and dressed in our best clothes and went off to St. Peter's Church to morning service, Sunday school and the 6 p.m. evensong, after which we would all walk to see Grandad Neil at his farm at Farnham Brook in Rothley. This meant walking along the prom, along the A6 from the village green to Linkfield Road. It was called the prom after the promenades at many of the seaside resorts, which we heard about but never visited. That was beyond our wildest dreams. Boys and girls, known as teenagers nowadays, would parade up and down the prom after church on Sunday evenings, talking and hoping to make new friends. Many young romances started there, but our hope was to meet Uncle Harry. He was Mum's brother, and he always celebrated his day off by visiting Betty Hawkins' shop to buy some Cadbury's milk chocolate, and there was always a square or two for us. In the early 1930s, rules and regulations about housing became stricter, and we were moved to a brand new council house at 76 Hawcliffe Road. It was like winning the lottery. A semi with 3 bedrooms, one for Mum, one for Dad, one for the girls, and unbelievably one for me. A kitchen, hot and cold running water, a proper bathroom, and a flush toilet just outside the back door, and a long, long garden which backed onto fields. Beautiful. At the top of Hawcliffe Road was the sky tip, where the quarry waste was tipped. When it was in use, clouds of dust blew all over the village. The move to Hawcliffe Road meant a much longer walk to St. Peter's School, but it was well worth it. Traffic along the A6 was still very, very sparse, i.e. 1 or 2 a day, and you really could play on it without any problems. I joined the church choir when I was about 8 years old, and really enjoyed the singing and sometimes sang solo. Later I also read one of the lessons and carried the cross to lead the choir before and after services. Much of my spare time was spent with my sisters at church or one of its many clubs such as King's Messengers, etc. Every Easter and Christmas, Mum washed and ironed all the white surplices, and although money was still very tight, she always put back what she earned back on the collection plate at Easter.
Could I just interrupt you there, Roy? Because
Yeah.
King's Messengers, what were they? Could you tell us?
Yeah. The King's Messengers, this was one of the ways that, even in those days, we could help people in Africa and other countries that were not as lucky as we were. We used to meet every week in the church room above the vicarage opposite St. Peter's, and we used to make little toys. The girls used to get, I think there were beans, and they used to dye them different colours and put them on strings to make necklaces for the little girls. Mm-hmm. And them, and with things that our parents made, used to be sent away to children in villages abroad.
Oh, right.
There were other little clubs that did that sort of thing as well. It was like the Ovaltinas were on a Saturday morning.
Oh, I
the
see.
Ovaltinas, and we all used to go to the pictures to see them, were Bertie's up Mount Sorrel. The church held a Sunday school treat every year and sometimes took us all on the quarry wagons to Kinchley House, where we had sports on the lawns, followed by a picnic and then back to Bond Lane in the wagons, and with lots of black sooty spots on us from the loco to prove it. Colonel and Mrs. Martin always made us very welcome. I started school at Christ Church Infant School on Rothley Road when I was 5 years old, and then at 7 years moved to St Peter's in Watling Street until I was 11. One thing you quickly learned when you started school was that south of Watling Street was the top end and north of Watling Street was the bottom end. And if you were a boy, it was not wise to go to the end where you didn't live, as you were likely to get a beating. In spite of this, I enjoyed my time there and was always a trier, never brilliant, but a worker. So it was something of a surprise when I passed my 11 plus exams in 1937 and won a scholarship to attend Rawlins Grammar School in Quorn. Compared to St Peter's Mount Sorrel, Rawlins was quite posh, and as my parents could not afford to buy the uniform, the blazer, etc., I just had the cap. I found it difficult to settle in, but it was okay later when we all got to know each other. One or two other boys from Mount Sorrel had also won scholarships, and we often walked to school together. By this time I had managed to get a job with Mr. Wright the butcher on the marketplace, delivering meat orders to his customers, and the money I earned was spent at George Spence's cycle shop near the Black Bridge to buy parts for an old bicycle I'd rescued from a ditch in Betty Enns's Lane. It was the first bike I owned, and it carried me many miles over the next few years. It also meant I could cycle to school. Some time later I was offered a job with Sam Hunt, who was one of the 3 bakers in the village, the others being Dobsons and Braybrookes. Sam delivered his bread, etc. by pony-drawn van, twice each week to shops and households in Mount Sorrel, Sarby, Cossington and Rothley. I was finding Saturdays too much for him. The job I was offered was to start at 7 a.m, helping to get the bread from the oven with the long wooden paddles and load it onto the van. Then we had breakfast before harnessing the pony and setting off on the deliveries, arriving back at about 6 p.m. to receive some sandwiches, a cup of tea and 1 shilling and 6pence wages. One of the perks of the job was a chunk of still hot bread with a chunk of cheese inside it. Lovely. I remember once, just before Christmas, we were going through Cossington when a piglet ran out of a farm gateway, across the road and between the van wheels, killing it instantly. Sam jumped down from the van, picked up the piglet, slung it in the back of the van and off we went. I don't know what happened to the piglet. About this time the village scout troop started up again, and as soon as I could I became a member. Bernard Jones was master, Ted Holmes and Mr. Smith teacher, assistants, and Mr. Walters from Loughborough was a district commissioner. I really loved the Scouts and spent as much time as possible camping, working for badges, etc., and together with Ken Ward and Jeff Rochester, the district's first King Scouts. Bob Bates had by now become Group Scoutmaster, and we all had some great times at camps at Oaks in Charnwoods and Lady Martin's in Woodhouse. The war had started and Mount Sorrel had its quota of evacuees, mainly from Sheffield and London. Several of the boys from Sheffield, including Matt and Peter Shepherd, joined the Scouts, and we became one of the best troops in the district. At this time I also became a member of Rawlins ATC, Air Training Corps, because, like every other boy, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. A number of the male teachers were called up to serve in the forces, and things at the schools then seemed to suffer. Dad joined the Home Guard, and I helped the air raid warden patrol Orcliffe Road to make sure no lights were showing. When the bombers came over, we could hear them change direction at the site of Swithron Reservoir. And one night when we were near the bottom of the road, they bombed Coventry. We saw flashing lights behind the sky tip, and all the door knockers down the road seemed to knock one after the other. As soon as I became 16, Dad found me a job at Wallsend Garage in Loughborough, and I had to leave school without taking any exams. Working 8 till 6 Monday to Friday and 8 till 12 Saturday for 15 bob a week. Every other Saturday night I did fire watching duty above the printing works nearby, as part of the precautions shared by all the businesses in the block. After a time I volunteered for aircrew and took tests at Cardington and was accepted. But as in the garage we were working on army vehicles, my boss got me 6 months exemption, after which I went to Cardigan again and was accepted again. However, when my papers finally arrived, they needed tank drivers in the army, and I was to report to Alexandria Barracks, 14th of December 1944. No, not the one in Egypt, Scotland. After 6 weeks training, getting everyone fit and learning our left feet from our right, I was posted to Barnard Castle and Catterick for training on everything from Bren gun carriers, light tanks to half tracks and Sherman tanks, finally ending up as driver mechanic on Shermans. We all then queued up with our shirt sleeves rolled up and received our injections and given passage for 14 days embarkation leave. I was very lucky because during that leave the war in Europe ended, and I was given 7 days more leave and spent that time at home celebrating. I remember dancing in the streets along with a lot of the other villagers. I then went to join the Royal Dragoons in Hanover, Germany. The journey took 3 days, and the sight of flooded Holland, where all to be seen was a railway track and then water, and then to Germany, which was completely devastated, made me realise just how lucky I'd been. During my 2.5 years service there, I was stationed at various places, the last one being Berlin, where I met Trudy, who later came to England and became my wife.